This is Jager here, signing in for this webinar on how successful companies are using root cause analysis to drive maximum benefit. And I think to some extent, talking about why companies are successful at doing root cause analysis, what makes them successful, what are the attributes of these programs. And if companies across the world, and particularly what I see in Australia, have vastly different levels of maturity with the way they organise their RCA programs, the way they do it, the way they conduct them, and the outcomes that they have with them. And if we look at the next part of the presentation, there it is. If we look at this, what we see is that there's a graduation of practice and expertise with that practice. I rarely see companies in the expert sort of scenario. Some companies are completely unaware at all that they have very ad hoc programs, that they're run by individuals rather than being well organised and structured. A lot of companies have an understanding of the value of RCA, but don't have strong programs to make them workable. We see a number of companies that have root cause analysis programs well embedded in their systems, but perhaps that they don't get the greatest value out of those programs for a number of different reasons. So what does work well, what I've seen work well across industry, is that companies who are successful have clearly defined approaches to using RCA. That they know when mature companies, they have clearly defined triggers, they know when to use RCA. But unless you train people in how to conduct those RCAs, then again, the outcomes are perhaps not as successful, that the results are inconsistent at the end of the day. Different approach at the end of the day. That why do we see anything other than really good reports, really good RCAs? Why do we see anything other than that? Well, arguably there's no standard. There's no quality control of the root cause analysis that's happening in the first place. And then if you allow anything other than excellent, then that's what you'll get. If you accept average as a report, then the outcome typically is reflective of that acceptance, that you see reports that simply don't meet the grade, that don't achieve what then the opposite side of that, or the flip side of that would be, well, what is done poorly across companies? What we see is that initially there's a lack of clearly defined triggers. Triggers being understanding the events that occur that will trigger a root cause analysis effort. So if we don't define those triggers, then people are unsure of when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen at all. And because of that, they don't collect information that then supports the RCA process. There's often a confusion about what method to use, because companies have a range of approaches to root cause analysis. Typically, most companies will do a 5 type of approach initially, and that's fine, and that's pretty consistent. But what happens after that often is less rigorous in the sense that we can either use Apollo or we can use Six Sigma or Tripod. Companies may use ICAM or may choose to use Taproot, all of which is fine. But if we don't understand which process we're using, then again, it creates a lack of continuity, I suppose, in one sense. because people get trained in one methodology or another, may be better at one than the other, and so on. So you have a spread of different knowledge, corporate knowledge within the business, and then it takes a little bit more control to try and get the right people involved for the RCAs that are being done. We expect RCAs to be done. We have triggers, we have events, but often the people that are doing the RCAs haven't been trained in how to do it. Whilst these different methodologies exist, there are many people out there who are doing RCAs, attempting to follow these processes, and have never actually been trained in how to follow that process itself. So when we do this, then the outcomes are inconsistent. That the quality is not always there. It may be, but it may not be. But there's no designated sort of quality sort of requirement anyway in many cases. The lack of support for root cause analysis as well is that we often expect people to do root cause analysis during their lunch hours. We don't actually give them the time to do it. If you expect it done in an hour or 2 hours, then how good will the RCA be? The fact that you're doing a root cause analysis, so past a 5 why, so you've ramped it up to another level, and if that's the case, then surely that problem warrants a significant investment to achieve the right outcome. And that does mean that you get enough people to support it, you give enough time for those people to actually go through the root cause analysis diligently and professionally. So what sort of things should RCA programs have in them? Now, initially what we see, 7 Ps, a bit about prior planning and preparation, preventing poor performance, is certainly part of that we have good structures to support our systems, that we know the triggers, that we have the right people trained, that we resource it to the level that's required for good outcomes to occur. So those supporting structures are critical in that sort of process. Then we need key manager support as well. Nothing of this nature actually is initiated without good manager support. Good manager by saying that there needs to be a manager. That manager needs to tick all the boxes from his end to ensure that root cause analysis is actually done on in a timely manner, done to the right quality, and so on. So without the manager's support, how do you get all the right people involved in attending the RCA? That arguably many people seem to think that the attendance to RCA is optional, whereas I think with good manager support, that shouldn't be the case. In fact, it's an important RCA that they need to be there, and it's not a question of if. If we have an RCA plan and stick to it, that we know our triggers, we know what process to use and when to use it, and we apply it when required, that the process should almost be automatic, and that the plan should drive that sort of understanding. We have a trigger, the process should just kick into gear. Someone allocated to do the RCA, someone that we notify the people involved to be there, organise the times and so on, that we may need to revisit from time to time to achieve that sort of outcome. Now we get the right people is an interesting word, get the right people involved, and how many people should be involved in root cause analysis. Less can sometimes be better, but you do need the right information. I recall walking into an RCA that had 17 people sitting in the room, and I wondered why everyone was there. Should they all have been there, or could we have brought it down to more manageable group size, sort of between 6 maybe and 8 people? Certainly the significance of the problem may drive the want to have more people in, but unless they're providing useful information, then there's a real question about them being there. And what happens because of that is that the length, the duration of the RCA process actually takes a lot more time. You want the right people. You want you don't need to double up on disciplines. The right people being knowledgeable about the problem rather than perhaps just the rank and file, anyone who thinks they should be there. So some smart decisions need to be made around who and how many people should attend the root cause analysis, be invited to, and their attendance being compulsory. The 7 Ps has been around for quite some time. If we don't do this stuff well, you know, the prior planning and preparation, root cause analysis requires information. Before you walk into the RCA, you need to be well organised. You need to have the right room with the right facilities in terms of whiteboards and so on, marker pens, ability to put up a display on a wall, so your projectors and so on. The right room. I've conducted RCAs in very small rooms, little office meeting rooms, where the space was limited and certainly the number of people attending filled the room. So it was very awkward at the end of the day because of that. So getting the right venue to start with is always important. That way we got the right information, that we disseminate this information to everyone who's attending. That people should have paper copies that they can look at, photographs, reports, any of that sort of nature should be planned, printed, and laid out for access to everyone when required. In terms of RCA, the overall plan, the bigger picture, I suppose, the 7 Ps impacts 2 things. In the initial RCA, the unique RCA that's being performed at that moment in time, so good planning and organisation at the front end really drives good outcomes. But in the bigger picture, the same thing can be said of an RCA program. That good structures, good organisational thought, I think, behind how to achieve the goals of any root cause analysis program. That the structures, the plans that support that, who gets trained, how much training do they get, who needs to be trained, all those sorts of things. Getting the triggers, the roles, responsibilities, all that sort of stuff needs to be thought about in the effort to have a successful RCA program. So the 7 Ps applies in that sort of space as well. What does any RCA program require? What does it still need? It needs manager support, yeah. It needs follow-up. It needs... I was recently at a site where they did loads of root cause analysis. They did a lot. But the catch, I suppose, was that they never followed up. They didn't implement the actions that came out of them. So whilst their initial efforts at root cause analysis, the triggers were being recognised, they were doing root cause analysis. If we don't implement the back end of it, which is putting the solutions into your data systems, into your SAP, for instance, issuing of your maintenance instructions, work orders, making sure they're completed, signed off. We don't do that part of it well, then we're doing a lot of work for nothing. And I think it drives a great dissatisfaction amongst the rank and file that actually do the RCAs, and therefore the lack of willingness to actually participate and perform them. How do you know? How do you know what? How do you know if you're successful with what you're doing? If we don't have plans to check what's going on, there are metrics, I believe, that we could use. I mean, we have metrics about how many RCAs are triggered, about how many RCAs are actually performed. Then we can have RCAs or trigger measures, metrics about have the actions been implemented and what percentage of them have been implemented. How do you know if you've been successful? If we don't measure befores and afters, how do you know you actually achieving what you're setting out to achieve, which is preventing recurrence of the problem. Unless we measure something, then how do we prove this? It's easy to say, yes, we got it, we nailed it. We can do all that sort of stuff, but how do you actually prove it to management is a vastly different thing. And it's about collecting the right sort of metrics to actually justify that statement. So what sort of things do we need in supporting structures? Well, I think initially there needs to be a very clear delineation of roles and responsibilities about who's going to do what and when they're going to do it. So assigning facilitators, having a list from which we know these are good facilitators, we will assign this person or this person or this person. So having that clearly designated makes life a lot easier and easier to control and manage. Who are the participants? At what level have these people been trained or not? Who looks after the overall program? Whose role, responsibility? Does a manager own that sort of role? If we assign such a role and give ownership to it, I think then RCA programs will be more successful and consistent in the long run. We do have a training plan, training for different types of root cause analysis, as in methodologies. Understand that training itself requires, I suppose, some revisit a number of years later. For people who may not have used the training, that they may need to revisit that and refresh their competencies, have their competencies evaluated. We train facilitators, but we also train participants. We need to probably train managers in what they need to do, to look out for. So there are certainly different levels of training involved in root cause analysis. So we do understand our trigger points, and that the trigger points can be a sliding scale as the value of product changes, so do our trigger points in many cases. The classic example was this was probably iron ore, where the value of the ore fell from, say, $150 a tonne down to around $50 a tonne, and the margins were certainly different. When it was $150 a tonne, then you didn't need a lot of downtime to trigger root cause analysis if the triggers were simply monetary. As the price of ore fell, then you needed 2-3 times the length of downtime to trigger substantial losses. So understanding this, that triggers are dynamic in a sense in terms of value of money, if that's what we use for our triggers, but safety and environmental sort of triggers typically are locked in stone and don't change overly much. But certainly the production side of it, the revenue and the cost of the RCAs on the business certainly are dynamic and change over time. But what I actually saw, if we go back to the previous one, I actually saw people were using cost, the value understanding, not to do root cause analysis because it didn't reach an acceptable trigger anymore. In a sense, I suppose they were correct, but I suppose those triggers were still there. There were still significant events occurring. So did the trigger point need to be adjusted to compensate for that? We have clear and consistent reporting structures. I think this is important, that I see some companies have different reports coming in. And I think that shows a lack of consistency in what they're doing. Different outcomes, perhaps, as well. And I think much harder then to manage if such a person did exist in the business, having that role to manage the RCA process. So having a clear, consistent reporting structure that's common, doesn't matter which department is issuing the report, that is the same one that's coming out. And I think if that were the case, then I think the quality of the reports would improve and your ability to audit them would also improve. Where do the RCAs go to? I think companies need to have a good look at this. All RCAs, in my opinion, should go to a central database. That they should be able to be seen by anyone who's looking for RCAs, or look at the general structure, the tone of the RCA process, to take individual RCAs and vet them, look at them. I think this is an important aspect. What we see companies almost operate in different silos, whilst different sites do different things. Surely a good opportunity here to bring all the RCAs into one central database, that anyone involved in the company across all sites have access to that database in terms of root cause analysis, and are able to do systematic searches for particular RCAs involving, because we use the same sorts of equipment, we run the same bearings and same sorts of structures in plants, so why wouldn't RCAs be similar to other RCAs within the business? And I think if we develop this corporate memory, then I think root cause analysis simply becomes easier. And you have a wealth of information sitting in an accessible space that could be of value to many people. The reports are reviewed. And if we have an appointed manager, that manager is understanding of what's required in root cause analysis and understands the principles that lie behind it. Therefore, they're able to look at a report and judge it on its merits, to say whether this is of an acceptable quality or standard for the business. And if it is not of an acceptable standard, that we actually take steps to educate the people who are initiating those reports and RCAs. That we need to have a perspective. If we accept anything other than excellent as a standard, then we'll see the average report, we'll see the report, because it's acceptable to do it like that. We only see anything less than excellent because it's acceptable to do it. So we've got to create some sort of standard, and excellent should be that standard. But to achieve that, that requires effort, that requires time, input. It needs auditing of reports consistently to drive that standard. And I think if we're serious about root cause analysis, and we do it for a reason, we do it because there's significant events, then the quality of those reports, the quality of the RCA that is driven has got to be looked at, has got to be a significant part of the structure that underpins our efforts at root cause analysis. Key manager support is critical for me. And I think what does that look like? From my perspective, what I would think it looks like is that someone within the business, a manager, has been given the ownership of root cause analysis, and that it forms part of their performance criteria, that they have KPIs that they're assessed against, so their performance managed against it. So we need to set up certain metrics, those sorts of things, that it needs clear ownership. Okay, so ownership is something that's important across the board. Ownership of actions, ownership of... There's a responsibility that needs to be accepted. Root cause analysis benefits from clear ownership because that person then looks after it and drives it and is performance managed against it. KPIs are important. What sort of metrics are we looking at here? And I think certainly some of the things I was talking about before about percentage of triggers and RCAs that have been initiated, whether the actions have been implemented or not, the standard of RCAs perhaps, things like that I think are important KPIs that need to be looked at. And there needs to be a manager of that whole process. What we see across many businesses is that their efforts at root cause analysis are often inconsistent. That if we have a key person, someone who drives it, a key manager, for instance, what we see is the quality of RCA improves. Typically, what goes hand in hand with that are that people are trained. There's a training program. Training is initiated in the methodology that's been chosen. So once that's embedded, that's fine. But often when a new manager appears, what happens is that they change plans. That they go, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're using a different process. So perhaps a perception that the existing process wasn't working, or is it just a new flavour of the month? So we see this radical change, and then a rollout of training and so on occurs. But over time, as managers move around from place to place, managers who perhaps have that ownership of that RCA portfolio, as managers change, so does the flavour of the RCA that's occurring. So often you have loss of momentum, okay, from root cause analysis. Or is it perhaps that we do need a shake-up now and then to actually reinvigorate the process? And we see the varied approaches to RCA as well. That it's not seen as important, therefore don't spend as much time on it. That we just do quick, dirty RCAs, quick being the operative method, and we don't spend too much time because everyone's too busy. And I think that's certainly part and parcel of many industries now. We're all too busy. But what's the purpose of RCA? To prevent recurrence of a problem that's been significant or impact to the business. So certainly there's value. And I think that's something we don't recognise, that the value of RCA across the business. And we do see varied approaches, new initiatives. I was just talking about changes the flow, how we do things. Often there's a lag of you've got to get these people trained now and put in, say, new structures and things in place. Having an RCA plan is important. We need to have a plan about when to do something. Those plans need to exist. They can be revisited over time and changed, but the plan needs to exist, and good companies have good plans. They stick to it. The process becomes automatic. That we have a trigger, it's in the system, there's been a report, an event report, okay, we've lost 4 hours of downtime of production, there's a trigger, the RCA should just kick in. Someone is appointed as the RCA facilitator, that we organise a team, that we get the RCA done, we implement the actions. So we have a plan, we just need to stick to it. I think one of the things we don't do, we don't often recognise the value of root cause analysis. And yet, when you ask people, why are we doing root cause analysis? How much do your problems cost you? The answer to that is often in terms of millions and millions of dollars across any calendar year. Then surely there's value in this. That we set it up, and we set it up properly, and we do it and perform it consistently and to the right standard. That it shouldn't be an ad hoc process. People are an integral part of what we're trying to do. You know, in any scenario, people don't plan to fail at what they do. I think in the statement, the rest of that, what would you call it? Statement, I suppose. People don't plan to fail, they simply fail to plan. But we don't achieve often what we want to achieve because we haven't got good plans in place. I think that's the key to that statement. Whilst we see value, why do we have ad hoc sort of setups for root cause analysis? Why? We've never set up appropriate plans to actually achieve anything else, or we don't stick to the plans that we do have. And certainly a change of management, change of corporate memory, I think, is part and parcel of that. We talk about triggers, and when I ask people what are their triggers, many simply can't really tell you. And is that simply because we're failing to communicate our plans, our structures, our information. To plan for success means we need to do certain things. Okay, and everything we've been talking about really is about that plan for success. Key ownership management, train people to the right level, set standards, clear triggers, clear reporting structures, auditing of all. That's planning for success. But this shouldn't be an ad hoc process. It's well planned, well set up, and we stick to it. Okay, so the token efforts, it might be around someone has said there's value, we need to do something, and you see very short periods of time, bursts of activity in the RCA sort of field, but they quickly die off because of what? A lack of, I don't know, what is it? But we do see this. I'm not sure why that actually happens. I was at a conference at one point where a chap from a large global conglomerate did a presentation on what they did in terms of root cause analysis at their site. And it was a paint division of so 1,000 or more people working there, and they had a history of problems, incidents in that area. And this chap was put in charge of this group. Now, this is from my memory of what he presented. I haven't got the paperwork, but the gist of it was that they selected a group of people to commit 10 to 20% of their time devoted solely to root cause analysis. That they trained people, that group, that 6 people, they trained them to an elite level. And in part of that commitment, that commitment was a short period of time. Arguably, it was for 2 years. So they invested in their training, they developed their understanding to an elite level. These people did all the root cause analysis. They facilitated everything. They were not, however, owners of the actions that came from them. They did generate the reports, they did the facilitations, but that was their role. From that point, it went into the system, and the system looked after it, and there was clear ownership of those actions that they were implemented. What do you think the outcome of that approach would have been over time? Now, they had a significant history of problems. They had repeat failures. It was seriously impacting their profitability, and certainly as their section of a larger conglomerate. It was a poorly operating part of the business. If you selected a group with the right skill set, you committed 10 to 20% of their time over 2 years. They were trained to elite levels. They did all the RCAs, didn't own actions. What do you think would be the outcome of that type of approach? And the outcome that this chap presented was amazing. He said their repeat failures dropped to all-time low levels, that their efficiencies and profitability was up well above 50% of what they were before. They had amazing outcomes because of what? Because of the level of competency, because they were applying a degree of excellence to their root cause analysis program, and they invested in it. You have to have a good plan. You've got to train people. So a plan for the whole business. Where does root cause analysis sit? This is important. Not everyone needs to be a facilitator. Not everyone needs facilitated training, but people do need to be aware of the process. So participant level training can be really important. They become better participants of root cause analysis. They know what they're looking at and talking about. They understand the process. The process happens faster because people are more knowledgeable about what they're doing. Getting the right people to facilitate and giving them the skills and knowledge to be effective facilitators. Controlling the group and guiding the group in the process that's being used. That management needs to understand the process as well. Across any business, your ability to do root cause analysis is often hinged upon what sort of critical mass you have of people who have been trained in the process you're using. So at one company, they trained all their reliability engineers in root cause analysis. What happened, and they were the only people that were being trained in root cause analysis. What happened was the REs, the reliability engineers, were so busy doing root cause analysis that they really didn't have time to do the rest of their job, right? And root cause analysis being only one part of it. So what the company understood from that was they actually needed to train more people in how to do root cause analysis, to give themselves more options, to share the load, to have the ability to discuss and talk and interact with each other and have the same conversation. So more people who are more knowledgeable about the process itself. There is the concept of developing facilitator competency. Training people to be facilitators is one part. Competency, however, takes time to develop, and it's the practice of doing root cause analysis that drives this. But not just the practice, it needs to be, how would you say, it needs to be practice of a good standard. And how do you know that if it's not being reviewed, if people aren't mentoring the facilitators to the right level? Facilitators need feedback on what they're doing to actually improve or get them to realize areas where they could improve their facilitation skills. And certainly we need to drive excellence. Excellence is a standard that needs to be achieved, that if we don't have the goal of excellence, then why audit anything? There's no requirement to audit if we don't have a standard to achieve or maintain. And so set the right level, set standard as the goal, and do whatever you need to do to drive that effort, which means invest in it, train, mentor, practice, do all those sorts of things. That we have a set minimum of RCAs for the facilitators to do any 1 year, 3 or 4 per year perhaps. They're practicing. I mean, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's certainly true of the skill of facilitation. You haven't done it for a while then. So I think the practice of it, that we set requirements for people to do RCAs, that we do mentor facilitators to the right level. That means give them feedback. There needs to be a coach, a facilitation coach, an RCA coach, the expert in the process perhaps, who drive it. It doesn't have to do all the RCAs, but does mentor other facilitators to achieve greater or better outcomes, to be more effective in what they do. Set standards, and that standard should be an excellent one. If you said anything other than that, then what's the drive to improve? And I think we have to continually strive to improve what we do. That we actually set aside, root cause analysis is an investment of time, of resources to achieve a certain outcome. That we actually put these time structures into place. That we also develop plans for refresher training. That we have a plan for training people 2-3 years down the track. We have a plan to visit or perform refresher training for these people, and that we give them opportunities to do so. We appoint ownership of actions. Actions are important. If we don't implement the actions that we initiate, then we're wasting our time. So single point of accountability is important, not departmental accountability. Actions can be fobbed off to others. I thought Joe Bloggs was going to do it. I thought John was going to do it. Single point of accountability, and make sure we set timeframes for those actions to be implemented. So I think we have to have a blueprint for root cause analysis. Plans for root cause analysis need to be well established, well structured, and that we need to stick to those plans that we create. Companies who are successful at root cause analysis have good plans and stick to them. Companies that are less mature in their structures see less consistent outcomes in root cause analysis. Some good, some average, probably more average than either good or bad. So opportunities exist. That's what we're saying. Opportunities exist for companies to get better at doing root cause analysis, to have more consistently better outcomes whenever it's done. But you have to plan for that. And that's the key to it all. All right. So that's, there are what we see on the screen now, opportunities to do root cause analysis coming up in 2019. Typically, okay, we haven't got Perth in there yet, but perhaps we should. But there are opportunities. We do on-site courses as well. So please be aware of those things, those dates, and certainly visit the Apollo website or the ARMS website to find out more information about them. Okay, that's Jager signing off. I hope you managed to glean something from the last 40 minutes or so, and wish you all the best. Okay, bye.